On a bright afternoon in the Wild West, Buster Scruggs rides through vast, empty landscapes on his horse. Despite his cheerful demeanor and habit of singing, he is actually the deadliest gunslinger in the region, with a large bounty on his head. During his journey, he stops at a small cantina for a drink. However, the bartender refuses to serve him whiskey, explaining that it's banned and only available to outlaws. Buster insists that, despite his clean-cut look, he is indeed an outlaw, but no one believes him. A cowboy even steps up, ready to fight and throw him out. Unfortunately for him, Buster is incredibly fast and guns down every single person in the cantina in seconds. He continues his travels until he arrives in Frenchman's Gulch, a town he's never been to before. His first stop is the saloon, where he is required to surrender his weapons at the entrance due to a strict no firearms policy. Once inside, he joins a poker game, agreeing to take over the hand left behind by the previous player. When he looks at his cards, he realizes that the player before him abandoned the game because he had the infamous dead man's hand. Refusing to play, Buster angers the other players, especially a menacing man named Joe. Ignoring the rules, Joe pulls out a hidden gun to threaten him, but Buster reacts instantly, kicking a loose plank on the table. The gun flips back and fires at Joe, killing him on the spot. Tension fills the saloon, but Buster quickly eases the mood by making up a song about Joe. Soon, the entire room joins in, singing and dancing along. Their fun is abruptly interrupted when Joe's brother storms in, furious after hearing what happened. Seeking revenge, he challenges Buster to a duel. As usual, Buster proves his superior skills, first shooting off each of the man's fingers before delivering a final, fatal shot, using only his reflection in a mirror to show off. Feeling smug and invincible, Buster's confidence is shaken when another singing cowboy known as the Kid arrives and challenges him to a duel. This time, the fight is over in a blink, but Buster is the one who falls. As his soul leaves his body, he accepts his fate with a sense of inevitability, acknowledging that no one stays on top forever. With a grin, he even joins in singing the Kid's victory song. Meanwhile, in New Mexico, a young cowboy stumbles upon an isolated bank and decides to rob it. The teller pretends to comply, bending down as if to retrieve the money. In reality, he reaches for hidden weapons and fires a few shots as a distraction before making a run for it. The cowboy barely manages to dodge the bullets and quickly grabs cash from the register. As he rushes outside, the teller fires again, forcing him to take cover behind a nearby well. The cowboy attempts to fight back, but his bullets prove useless as the banker has strapped pots and pans to his body, deflecting every shot. With this makeshift armor, the teller confidently approaches and knocks the cowboy unconscious. Hours later, he finds himself tied to a tree, with his hands bound to his horse's saddle. A posse has already judged him guilty and sentenced him to death, giving him a chance to say his final words. However, before he can speak, a group of Comanche warriors ambushes them, swiftly killing the entire posse. They leave the cowboy alive on his horse, amused by the thought of him suffering a slow, helpless fate. For hours, the cowboy struggles to keep his horse still, knowing that any sudden movement could lead to his demise. His luck finally turns when a passing drover spots him and, with expert aim, shoots the rope to free him. Grateful, the cowboy rides along with the drover, believing he's finally safe. However, his fortune is short-lived. Less than an hour later, another posse finds them, and the drover, revealed to be a rustler, abandons him to escape. Once again, the cowboy is captured and taken to town, where the judge finds him guilty and sentences him to hang. As he stands at the gallows, he focuses on a young woman in the crowd, hoping her beauty will be the last thing he sees before his life ends. Not far away, an aging impresario travels from town to town with Harrison, a young man born without arms or legs, but gifted with a remarkable voice. Each stop becomes a stage, where Harrison captivates audiences by reciting classics from Shakespeare, Lincoln, and other greats, while the impresario collects money. He also takes care of Harrison's daily needs, feeding him, applying his makeup, and even assisting him with basic bodily functions. However, the impresario grows increasingly weary of this arrangement. His frustration mounts with each passing day, and his patience wears thin. When they visit bawdy houses, he indulges himself without a second thought for Harrison. Instead of paying for a girl for his companion, he simply turns Harrison around, leaving him in the same room to listen to everything. The young performer, unable to escape his circumstances, is forced to endure the humiliation in silence. As the impresario and Harrison continue traveling through remote mountain towns, their audiences dwindle and they struggle to earn money. One evening, the impresario notices that a small crowd has gathered, not for their show, but for another wagon featuring a remarkable act. The spectators cheer for a chicken that can solve basic arithmetic by pecking at painted numbers. Realizing its potential, the impresario decides to purchase the bird, caring for it just as attentively as he once did for Harrison. However, Harrison grows increasingly anxious, sensing that his role in their act might soon come to an end. The following day, the impresario halts their wagon by a bridge and drops a heavy stone into the river below, measuring the depth of the water. Satisfied with the results, he returns to the road. But now his only passenger is the chicken. Harrison has been unceremoniously pushed into the river, left to his fate. Elsewhere, a rugged prospector arrives at a mountain river in search of gold. At first, his pan only catches small specks, but by meticulously tracking the increasing amounts, he is able to follow the signs leading him to the source. He sets up camp near the river, sustaining himself by fishing and stealing eggs from birds' nests. After days of methodical digging, the prospector successfully pinpoints the location of a rich gold vein. His calculations prove correct, and he finally uncovers a massive deposit that promises to make him wealthy. However, before he can celebrate, a young man who has been secretly tracking him steps forward and shoots him. Confident that he has eliminated his competition, the young man lights a cigarette in triumph and climbs into the pit to dispose of the body, only to be ambushed. The prospector, having only feigned death, wrestles him for the gun and ultimately kills him. After examining his wound, he confirms that the bullet passed cleanly through his back without hitting anything vital. With the danger behind him, the prospector bandages himself up, finishes extracting his gold, and buries the young man in the hole he had dug. Then, with his fortune in tow, he mounts his horse and leaves the valley behind. Meanwhile, siblings Alice and Gilbert have joined a wagon train on the Oregon Trail. Though Gilbert lacks business acumen, he insists that he has secured a partner willing to marry Alice upon their arrival in Oregon. Traveling with them is Gilbert's dog, President Pierce, whose constant barking quickly earns the irritation of the other travelers. Not long into the journey, Gilbert succumbs to a violent coughing fit and dies, likely from cholera. The wagon train's leaders, Billy and Arthur, help Alice bury him, then ask if she intends to continue with them or return home. With nowhere else to go, Alice decides to press on, hoping to find a new beginning in Oregon. The following day, Alice faces another setback. The young man Gilbert had hired to lead their wagon approaches her, claiming he was promised a wage and expecting half his payment upon reaching the journey's midpoint. Alice finds herself in a difficult position. She has no money, and whatever funds her brother had were buried with him in his coat. Retrieving it is no longer an option. Unsure of what to do, she turns to Arthur and Billy for guidance. They immediately point out that the wage the hired boy claims he was promised is absurdly high. Alice blames Gilbert's poor business sense, but Billy suspects the boy might be lying. He advises her to ignore the demand for now, promising to handle the situation when they reach the halfway point by intimidating the boy into telling the truth. Meanwhile, President Pierce's constant barking continues to frustrate the travelers. Since Alice doesn't consider the dog her responsibility, Billy helps her get rid of him by leading him into the valley and firing a shot into the sky to scare him away. The journey proceeds smoothly, giving Alice and Billy time to bond. They find they share similar views on life, and a genuine connection begins to form between them. When the hired boy once again demands confirmation of his payment, Billy attempts to reason with him but gets nowhere. Instead, he presents Alice with an alternative. Since he has been contemplating retiring from the wagon train, he proposes marriage, offering to take on Gilbert's debt in exchange for building a life together. Alice is caught off guard but realizes she has developed feelings for Billy too. After some thought, she accepts his proposal. A few days later, Arthur notices fresh footprints near the camp and quickly checks on the travelers, only to realize Alice is missing. Unbeknownst to the others, she had wandered off after hearing President Pierce barking and had been watching him harass some prairie dogs, not realizing how far she had strayed. Arthur soon finds her and hurries to bring her back, but their luck runs out. They are ambushed by a Native American war party. Armed with 2 guns, Arthur hands one to Alice and orders her to use it on herself if he's killed, warning that capture would lead to a far worse fate. As a seasoned gunman, Arthur manages to drive most of the attackers away with well-placed shots. Just when it seems the danger has passed, a warrior suddenly blindsides him, striking him down before he can react. Feigning unconsciousness, Arthur waits for the Native American warrior to approach before swiftly shooting him. He then rushes back to Alice's side, only to face a heartbreaking sight. Believing Arthur had died, Alice followed his instructions and used the pistol on herself. With a heavy heart, he covers her body with his coat and begins the solemn journey back to the wagon train. President Pierce follows him as he struggles with the thought of how he will break the devastating news to Billy. Elsewhere, 5 travelers ride together in a stagecoach, bound for Fort Morgan. Among them is Thigpen, who irritates everyone by singing for most of the journey. Eventually, he shifts the conversation to his work, mentioning that he and his partner Clarence frequently travel this route while transporting cargo. He vaguely refers to something on the roof of the coach but avoids explaining what it is. With Thigpen finally quiet, the passengers begin to talk. A fur trapper shares a story about his relationship with a Hunkpapa woman, emphasizing how they connected despite not speaking the same language. He believes that all people share the same fundamental needs, a sentiment that deeply offends Lady Betjeman, a devout Christian. She insists that humanity is divided into 2 groups, the righteous and the sinful, leading to a heated debate about human nature. Frenchman René joins the discussion, while Thigpen and Clarence contribute only brief remarks, clearly enjoying the rising tension. When René questions Lady Betjeman's faithfulness to her husband during their years apart, she becomes so enraged that she nearly collapses. Alarmed, René leans out of the window to ask the driver to stop the coach, but the driver ignores him. Thigpen calmly explains that company policy forbids stopping under any circumstances. To ease the tension, Clarence starts singing a melancholic folk tune. The melody soothes Lady Betjeman, but unexpectedly brings Thigpen to tears. Curious about their enigmatic companions, the trapper asks about their line of work. Thigpen finally reveals that he and Clarence are bounty hunters. Their method is simple. Thigpen keeps their targets distracted with stories, while Clarence swiftly eliminates them. He admits to finding beauty in their dying expressions, a chilling confession that unsettles the rest of the passengers. By the time the stagecoach reaches Fort Morgan, fear has gripped René, Lady Betjeman, and the trapper. Thigpen and Clarence unload their cargo, a corpse, before heading into the hotel where they will be staying. The remaining passengers hesitate to disembark, growing increasingly wary of their surroundings. Eventually, they step inside, and René, sensing an ominous finality, closes the door behind them as he watches the coach disappear into the distance, realizing that if trouble arises, escape may not be an option. 20,000 years ago in prehistoric Europe, a group of hunters led by their chief Tao prepares to take down a herd of steppe bison. They form a wall of spears, forcing most of the animals to charge off a cliff. However, 3 bison remain behind, and one aggressive bull targets Tao's son, Keda. The beast strikes him violently with its horns and drags him toward the cliff's edge. Tao manages to wound the animal with his spear, but Keda loses his balance and plummets into the abyss. This event unfolds 1 week after Keda and his friend Kappa pass the tribe's spear-making test, proving their readiness to join their first hunting expedition before winter. As part of their initiation into adulthood, the boys endure a ritual beating from the older hunters, symbolizing the hardships they will face. Later that night, while pretending to sleep, Keda overhears a conversation between his parents. His mother, Ro, worries that he is too soft-hearted for hunting, but Tao insists Keda must prove himself to the tribe. The next morning, after receiving the shaman's blessing and an extra piece of fur from Ro for protection, Keda departs with the hunting party. They navigate the land by following the sacred path, an ancient trail marked by rock sculptures left by their ancestors. Hand paintings on these stones indicate the direction to the hunting grounds. Along the way, they encounter another group of hunters led by Shi, an old friend of Tao's who is grieving the recent loss of his son. The 2 groups decide to travel together. Eager to impress his father, Keda repeatedly tries to demonstrate his abilities. However, he struggles to start a fire and hesitates when given the chance to kill a captured boar, leaving him feeling inadequate. One night, as the men sit around a fire, an eerie sound startles them, prompting them to assume defensive positions. When nothing happens, they lower their guard, a fatal mistake. A cave lion suddenly lunges from the shadows, seizing Kappa and dragging him away. The following morning, the hunters construct a cairn to honor Kappa's spirit, a ritual symbolizing his journey to the afterlife. The expedition continues with only brief stops for hunting and rest. One evening, they take shelter in a large cave, where Tao marks Keda's skin with a tattoo of the constellations. This symbolic act ensures that no matter how far he travels, he will always find his way home. After many days, they finally come across a trail of dung, leading them to a herd of steppe bison. This brings the story full circle to the moment of the hunt. As Keda falls from the cliff, he desperately tries to cling to the jagged rock face, but his grip fails, and he crashes onto a lower ledge, breaking his leg and losing consciousness. Tao, frantic with grief, attempts to climb down to rescue him, but the other hunters restrain him, reminding him that it is already too late. As the other hunters prepare the sleds to transport the bison, Tao remains at the cliff's edge, overcome with grief. With the hunt's spoils divided, Shi's group departs for their own village, leaving Tao's party to spend one final night at camp. The next morning, the men convince Tao that it is time to move on. Before leaving, he builds a memorial cairn for Keda, his sorrow still evident. Hours after the hunters are gone, a vulture lands on Keda, pecking at him in search of food. The pain jolts him awake, and in a desperate act of survival, he grabs the bird and wrings its neck. Slowly, he becomes aware of his surroundings and his broken leg. He attempts to climb down, but the lack of handholds forces him into a perilous struggle, leaving him hanging in agony. As a storm rolls in, heavy rain begins to flood the ground below. Realizing he has no choice, Keda releases his grip and plunges into the water, losing consciousness once more. By the next morning, the rain has stopped and the floodwaters have receded. He drinks from a small puddle before splinting his injured leg. With great effort, he climbs back to the top of the cliff, only to find the memorial left by his father. Overcome with frustration at being abandoned, he angrily kicks it down and begins his journey home alone. Kida struggles to survive in the wild. He eats insects, collects water from puddles, and climbs trees at night to avoid predators. One afternoon, a pack of wolves spots him and gives chase. He scrambles up a tree, but not before one wolf manages to latch onto his leg. He stabs it with his knife and pulls himself to safety. The pack lingers for a while but eventually moves on, leaving behind the wounded wolf. Preparing to deliver a finishing blow, Keda hesitates. The animal's whimpers are unbearable, and despite his own struggles, he cannot ignore its suffering. Carefully, he binds the wolf's snout to prevent it from biting him, then lifts it and carries it to a nearby lake to clean its wound. However, their rest is short-lived as the growls of approaching hyenas force them to move again. Carrying the injured wolf, Kida stumbles upon a cave where they finally find a safe place to sleep. The next morning, Kida discovers a mortar among a pile of bones and uses it to grind plants into a healing salve, which he applies to his injured foot. Meanwhile, the wolf manages to free its snout. Seeing that the animal is no longer aggressive, Keda cautiously shares his water, which the wolf hesitantly drinks after much growling. Growing more comfortable, Keda even uses the fur his mother gave him to clean the wolf's wound and offers it some of the worms he finds. However, worms are not enough to sustain them, so Keda gathers the courage to hunt. Using a rock, he successfully kills a rabbit and for the first time manages to start a fire to cook it. As Keda prepares his meal, the wolf tries to steal the rabbit, but he quickly pushes it away, recalling his father's lessons on leadership. To assert dominance, he ensures that he eats first, only feeding the wolf once he is done. Despite sharing his food, the wolf remains distant and refuses to let Keda touch it. With winter fast approaching, Keda knows he must find his way home before the heavy snowfall begins. He doubts his ability to survive without his father, but understands that he has no choice. After gathering enough supplies and wrestling with the wolf to retrieve his fur, Keda finally leaves the cave. However, to his frustration, the wolf refuses to stop following him, no matter how many times he orders it to leave. Eventually, Keda gives up and accepts the wolf as his traveling companion. Over time, he even trains it to respond to his whistle. Their first hunting attempts together are disastrous, but with practice, they learn to coordinate their attacks, making it easier to catch prey. At night, Keda verifies their direction using the constellation tattoo on his hand. Slowly, the wolf begins to trust him, eventually allowing Keda to touch it. One afternoon, after spending time fishing and bathing in a lake, Keda decides to name the wolf Alpha. Their journey stretches on, and as expected, winter catches up with them, bringing the first snowfall. One evening, as they sit by the bonfire eating, a pack of wolves appears, Alpha's family. Understanding the pain of separation, Keda encourages Alpha to reunite with them. Now alone again, he resumes his journey. As days pass, snowstorms become more frequent, making travel increasingly difficult. His resolve weakens when he dreams of Tao reaching home and delivering the heartbreaking news to Ro. Pushing forward, Keda trudges through yet another storm when he unexpectedly encounters Alpha and its pack. Overcome with relief, he runs toward them, only for the ice beneath his feet to crack. He plunges into the freezing water, losing his mother's fur and most of his equipment. Desperately, he strikes the ice with his knife, breaking through just enough for Alpha to grab hold of him and pull him to safety. That night, Keda sleeps curled up against Alpha, seeking warmth to combat the freezing cold. As they continue their journey the next day, they come across a trail of footprints leading to a small hut. Sadly, the owner has frozen to death, and there is no food inside. However, Keda finds a bow and arrows, which he takes for hunting, ignoring Alpha's concerned whimpers when he suddenly starts coughing up blood. Later, the duo finds themselves in a dire situation. Hyenas are closing in from behind, while a deadly storm rages ahead. With no other option, they run until they discover a cave for shelter. However, the cave is already occupied by a ferocious cave lion that immediately attacks. Alpha bravely fights the beast while Keda carefully nocks an arrow, focusing intently on his target. With a well-placed shot, he kills the lion and saves Alpha, though the wolf suffers severe injuries from the fight. As they resume their slow journey through the relentless snowstorm, they finally come across the sculpture marking the sacred path. Keda knows they must be close to home. His spirits lift further when the northern lights illuminate the sky one night, a sign he believes to be guidance from his ancestors. But Alpha is too weak to continue and eventually collapses in exhaustion. Unwilling to abandon his companion, Keda lifts the wolf onto his shoulders, despite his own worsening condition and the blood he continues to cough up. However, the journey proves too much, and soon he collapses as well. In his unconscious state, Keda recalls a conversation he once overheard between his parents. To ease Ro's worries, Tao had assured her that Keda was stronger than he himself realized. Drawing strength from his father's words, Keda regains consciousness, determined to survive. Summoning every ounce of willpower, He picks up Alpha once more and pushes forward through the storm until they finally reach his tribe. The sight of them stuns everyone, and Tao, overwhelmed with emotion, embraces his son, telling him how proud he is. He quickly takes Kita and Alpha inside a tent to be treated. Once Kita is cared for and given food, the tribe's shaman examines Alpha and discovers the cause of her weakness. She is not just injured but pregnant. Soon she gives birth to a litter of healthy pups, and the tribe welcomes them as part of their family. Years later, as the pups grow into strong adult wolves, they are paired with hunters and accompany them on their next great hunt before winter, marking the beginning of a new tradition.